I never thought a simple dinner invitation would change my life forever. Standing frozen at the entrance to Bellamy's, the most exclusive restaurant in the city, I watched my cousin Amanda's face transform from a welcoming smile to a cold sneer. "This table is for family." "Go find a spot outside," she announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. The entire Taylor clan erupted in laughter as I stood there in my carefully chosen dress, holding a small gift I'd spent hours selecting. Humiliation burned through me like wildfire. I turned to leave dignity in tatters when suddenly a waiter appeared beside me with an expensive bottle of champagne and a bill for $2,800. He placed it directly in front of me with a flourish. Something shifted inside me in that moment. I took a sip of my coffee and pushed the bill back. 3 weeks earlier, I had been sorting through case files in my cramped social worker office when my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. I almost didn't answer, assuming it was another telemarketer, but something made me pick up on the final ring. "Margie, it's Amanda. Amanda Taylor, your cousin." The sound of her voice sent me back 20 years to childhood memories I'd tried to forget. Amanda had been the golden child of the Taylor family, while my mother had been the black sheep disowned for marrying my father, a kind-hearted teacher with no family fortune or connections. Amanda. "Wow, it's been forever," I managed to say, shuffling papers on my desk nervously. "Too long," she said, her voice warm and friendly. "Listen, I know our families haven't been close, but I've been thinking a lot about healing old wounds. We're having our annual Taylor family reunion next month at Bellamy's. I really want you to come." I sat back in my chair, genuinely surprised. The Taylors were one of the wealthiest families in the state, owners of Taylor Enterprises, a real estate development company worth millions. Growing up, I'd heard stories about their lavish lifestyle from my mother, who spoke of her childhood with a mixture of nostalgia and pain. "I don't know, Amanda. It's been 20 years since anyone in your family has spoken to me or my mom. My mother had passed away just 6 months earlier, after a battle with cancer, making the sudden invitation feel even more strange." "That's exactly why it's time," Amanda insisted. "Uncle Richard is getting older, and he's been talking about family legacy. I mentioned you, and he agreed it was time to bring everyone together. Please say yes." Over the next 2 weeks, Amanda called repeatedly, each time more insistent that my presence was important. She sent pictures of family gatherings I'd missed, spoke about cousins I barely remembered, and painted a picture of a family eager to welcome me back into the fold. "I don't trust her," Lisa, my best friend since college, said over coffee, after I told her about the invitation. Lisa worked as a corporate attorney and had a well-tuned radar for deception. "The Taylors ignored your existence for decades, and now they suddenly want to play happy family. Something feels off." "Maybe they've changed," I said, though I didn't completely believe it myself. Mom always said Uncle Richard had a good heart underneath all that business toughness. She kept all those newspaper clippings about the family, you know. Even after everything. Lisa raised an eyebrow. "Just be careful. People like that don't change their spots overnight." Despite Lisa's warnings, I found myself hoping for reconciliation. My mother's death had left me feeling more alone than ever. The thought of connecting with extended family held a powerful appeal, even if the rational part of me remained skeptical. I spent an entire paycheck on a navy blue dress for the occasion, practiced what I might say to relatives. I barely remembered, and even rehearsed responses to potential awkward questions. The night before the reunion, I stood in front of my mirror, trying to see any resemblance to the Taylor side of my family in my features. The drive to Bellamy's took 40 minutes from my small apartment on the outskirts of the city. Each mile increased my anxiety, but also my hope. Maybe this really was an olive branch. Maybe Amanda had matured. Maybe Uncle Richard regretted cutting off my mother all those years ago. When I arrived at the restaurant, the valet gave my 10-year-old Honda a dubious look before taking my keys. I smoothed my dress, took a deep breath, and walked into the marble-floored lobby where Amanda had told me to meet her. She was standing alone near the hostess station, looking exactly like the Instagram photos she posted constantly. Expensively dressed in a red designer, dress blonde hair, perfectly styled diamond earrings catching the light. For a moment, her face lit up with what seemed like genuine pleasure. "Margie, you made it." She air-kissed both my cheeks and grabbed my hands. "Let me look at you. It's been so long." For a brief, shining moment, I felt a surge of hope. Maybe this would be the beginning of healing old wounds, just as she'd said. Then Amanda glanced over my shoulder, and her expression changed so quickly I almost missed it. A calculating coldness replaced the warmth in her eyes as several other well-dressed people approached. More Taylor relatives. "Is this?" her asked a tall woman with the same blonde hair as Amanda. Amanda's grip on my hands tightened painfully for a second before she dropped them entirely and stepped back. "Yes, this is Margie, my charity case cousin," she said, with a small laugh that held no humor. "She actually came." In that moment, I knew Lisa had been right all along. This wasn't about healing anything, but I couldn't have imagined just how bad it was about to get. Amanda led me toward a private dining room in the back of Bellamy's, her hand gripping my elbow tightly enough to leave marks. The other relatives followed behind, whispering, and occasionally letting out small, derisive laughs. My stomach knotted with each step, but some stubborn part of me refused to turn and run. The private room was stunning. Crystal chandeliers hung from a high ceiling, the tables arranged in a U-shape and covered with pristine white linens. Floral arrangements that probably cost more than my monthly rent adorned every surface. Around 20 people were already seated, all impeccably dressed, all wearing expressions ranging from curiosity to outright disdain as they watched me enter. At the head of the table sat Uncle Richard, now in his 70s, but still imposing with his full head of silver hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to look straight through me. He didn't smile or rise to greet me, merely watched with an unreadable expression. An uncomfortable silence fell as we reached the opening of the U-shaped table arrangement. I clutched my small gift bag tighter, wishing I could disappear. Amanda cleared her throat theatrically. "Everyone, I'd like to introduce Margie. Some of you might remember her mother, my Aunt Sarah, who decided family wasn't important to her." I flinched at the characterization. My mother had loved her family deeply. It was they who had cut her off when she married my father. "I thought it might be nice to have her join us." Amanda continued, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "But it seems there's been a misunderstanding." She turned to me then, her smile sharp as a knife. "This table is for family. Real family. Go find a spot outside." Laughter erupted around the table, some nervous, some genuine. A flush of heat rushed up my neck and into my cheeks as the full impact of her words sank in. This whole thing had been orchestrated solely to humiliate me. "You invited me," I said quietly, struggling to maintain composure. "Did I?" Amanda raised a perfectly shaped eyebrow. "I think you misunderstood. I said the family was gathering. I never said you were welcome to join." More laughter followed. A young man around my age looked uncomfortable but remained silent. An older woman dabbed at her eyes, whether from laughter or discomfort, I couldn't tell. Memories flooded back. My 10th birthday, when I'd invited Amanda and the other Taylor cousins, only to wait all afternoon for guests who never arrived. My high school graduation that none of them attended, despite my mother's hopeful invitations. My mother's funeral service empty of Taylor family members. You know what, Amanda? You're right. I'm not family. Not to people who could treat someone this way. I managed to keep my voice steady despite the burning in my throat. My mother was the lucky one. She got away from all of this. Amanda's smile faltered slightly, but she recovered quickly. Still the same self-righteous attitude. Some things never change. Uncle Richard watched our exchange without comment, his face still unreadable. I searched for any sign that he might intervene, might show some decency, but he remained silent. Just like he had when he disowned my mother all those years ago. With as much dignity as I could muster, I turned to leave. The walk to the door felt endless, each step on the plush carpet echoing in my ears along with the continued murmurs and snickers. My carefully applied makeup felt like a mask, my new dress like a costume I had foolishly believed would help me fit in with people who had never wanted me. Just as I reached the door, a hand touched my shoulder. I turned, half hoping it might be Uncle Richard, or perhaps that uncomfortable-looking young man coming to apologize. Instead, I found myself face to face with an older man in a tailored suit, who I recognized as the restaurant manager from the small gold badge on his lapel. "Miss Taylor," he said quietly, his expression professionally neutral, despite having undoubtedly witnessed my humiliation. "There seems to be some confusion. If you'll come with me, please." Confused, but desperate to escape the dining room, I followed him. Behind us, I could hear Amanda saying something that caused another round of laughter, but the sound faded as we moved into the main restaurant area. "I'm actually Margie Wilson," I corrected him, assuming he had mistaken me for another Taylor. "And I was just leaving." The manager gave me a puzzled look, but the reservation and pre-order were placed under Margie Taylor for the private dining experience. He gestured toward a small intimate table in an alcove, near a window overlooking the city. "Everything has been prepared according to your specifications." I stared at the table beautifully set for one person with multiple wine glasses and an array of silverware. There must be a mistake. I didn't make any reservation. He frowned and consulted a tablet he was carrying. The reservation was made 2 weeks ago, with specific instructions for the chef's tasting menu and wine pairings. A credit card was provided for the deposit. As we stood there in confusion, a waiter approached with a bottle of champagne in an ice bucket. According to the label, it was Dom Perignon, which I knew cost hundreds of dollars even in a store, let alone with restaurant markup. And that's when he placed it in front of me, along with a leather folder. When he opened it, I saw the bill for $2,800, with my name printed neatly at the top. In that moment, as I took a sip of water from a glass on the nearby table and calmly pushed the bill back, I had no idea that this was just the beginning of Amanda's plan, or that by the end of the night, everything I thought I knew about the Taylor family would be turned upside down. "There must be some mistake," I told the waiter, trying to keep my voice steady. "I didn't order any of this." The waiter looked uncomfortable. "The order was placed under your name, Miss Taylor. The credit card information is already on file." He gestured discreetly toward the private dining room. "One of the guests from the family gathering confirmed your identity when you arrived." I felt a cold dread settling in my stomach. "Let me guess. Was it Amanda Taylor?" He hesitated but gave a small nod, maintaining his professional demeanor. "I'm not at liberty to discuss other guests, but yes, Miss Amanda confirmed you would be handling this separate bill." The manager, sensing trouble, stepped closer. "Is there a problem with the order, Miss Wilson?" "Margie Wilson," I corrected again, more firmly this time. "And yes, there's a problem. I didn't place this order. I don't have an account here. And I certainly can't pay a $2,800 bill for champagne I didn't order." As we spoke, a commotion from a nearby table caught my attention. 2 men in expensive suits were speaking in hushed but heated tones. "The quarterly numbers don't make sense," Richard, one was saying. "Someone's been moving money around, and I'm telling you it's systematic." I realized with a start that the older man was Bruce Hoffman, Taylor Enterprises' CFO, whom I recognized from news articles about the company. I'd seen his picture alongside Uncle Richard's in the business section my mother used to read so carefully. "Keep your voice down," Uncle Richard hissed, glancing around. "This isn't the place." "It's been going on for at least 3 years, Hoffman continued, lowering his voice but still audible from where I stood. "Small amounts at first, but getting bolder, almost like they wanted to be caught. And the transactions are all authorized with your approval code, but you've denied doing it." Their conversation was interrupted when a server approached their table. I turned back to my own situation, my mind racing. Something very strange was happening, and somehow I felt like I was being set up as more than just the butt of a cruel family joke. The manager was examining the bill with a frown. The reservation was made under Margie Taylor with a Taylor Enterprises corporate card. The instructions were very specific. "May I see the credit card receipt?" I asked, an idea forming. Reluctantly, he handed me the pre-authorization slip. There at the bottom was a signature, supposedly mine, but it was clearly forged. I'd seen Amanda's handwriting on the notes she'd sent with her invitation. The similarity was unmistakable, though she'd tried to make it look like my signature. "This isn't my signature," I said firmly. "I think I'm being set up." I pulled out my driver's license. "Look, my legal name is Margaret Wilson, not Taylor. I've never used the Taylor name. My mother was a Taylor before she married, but I've always been a Wilson." As I spoke, I noticed a security guard glancing in our direction. At the same moment, I saw Amanda emerge from the private dining room, pointing directly at me while speaking to another staff member. My heart raced as pieces started clicking into place. Amanda's sudden interest in reconnecting, the elaborate setup for public humiliation, and now, apparently, some kind of financial fraud using my identity. But why me? What could she possibly gain? "Is there somewhere we could speak privately?" I asked the manager, lowering my voice. "I think I'm being framed for something and I need to make a phone call." The manager looked between me and Amanda, who was now walking purposefully in our direction with a security guard in tow. He made a quick decision. "This way," he said, guiding me toward a staff area. "You can use my office for a moment." Once inside the small but elegant office, I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and called Lisa. "Lisa, it's me. I'm at Bellamy's, and things have gone really wrong," I said, as soon as she answered. I quickly explained the situation. "Don't sign anything," she said immediately. "Don't pay anything. This sounds like fraud. I'm on my way. 20 minutes tops." After hanging up, I sat in the manager's chair, trying to calm my racing thoughts. As I reached into my purse for a tissue, my fingers brushed against an unfamiliar envelope. Puzzled, I pulled it out. The envelope was cream-colored expensive stationery with "For Margie" written on the front in my mother's distinctive handwriting. With trembling fingers, I opened it, wondering how it had gotten into my purse and why I hadn't noticed it before. Inside was a letter and what appeared to be legal documents. "My dearest Margie," the letter began in my mother's handwriting. "If you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you've reconnected with the Taylor family in some way. I need you to know the truth." I scanned the pages with growing shock. According to the documents, my mother had never legally surrendered her 15% stake in Taylor Enterprises when she was disowned. The shares had been held in trust, and upon her death they had transferred to me. There were account numbers, passwords, and detailed instructions about how to claim my inheritance. "I never told you because I wanted you to live free from their influence," my mother wrote. "But I've watched from a distance as Amanda's greed has grown. Richard is getting older and paying less attention. I've seen the signs of financial manipulation in their quarterly reports. Be careful, my darling. Amanda will do anything to protect herself. With love, always, Mom." I sat back, stunned. I owned 15% of Taylor Enterprises. The company was worth millions. No wonder Amanda had suddenly taken an interest in me. But how did she know about my shares? And what exactly had she been doing that made her so desperate to discredit me? A knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. When I opened it, expecting the manager, I instead found a young man in bartender's attire. "Sorry to intrude," he said quietly. "My name's James. I work the bar here, and I overheard what happened. I think you should know that, miss. Amanda Taylor has been telling the security staff that you're trying to defraud the restaurant and the family business." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, suspicious of yet another stranger, inserting themselves into this bizarre situation. "Because I've seen her pull similar stunts before," he said. "She brings business associates here often. She's not a good person, and what she did to you in front of everyone wasn't right." I studied him, trying to decide if I could trust him. His expression seemed sincere, his eyes concerned. "Thanks for the warning," I said finally. "My friend's on her way. She's an attorney." He nodded and handed me a business card. "If you need a witness to what happened tonight, call me. I've been serving the Taylor family for 3 years. I've seen and heard plenty, As he turned to go, another figure appeared in the doorway. Uncle Richard himself, looking grave and somehow older than he had just an hour ago. "Margie," he said, his voice gruff, but not unkind. "I think we need to talk." Uncle Richard closed the door behind him, his imposing figure filling the small office space. Up close, I could see the lines of worry etched deeply around his eyes and mouth. He looked tired in a way that expensive suits and power couldn't disguise. "You look like your mother," he said abruptly, catching me off guard. His eyes scanned my face with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. Same determined expression. "I'll take that as a compliment," I replied, gathering my courage. "Though I doubt you came here to discuss family resemblances." He almost smiled, a brief twitch at the corner of his mouth. "No, I suppose not." He glanced at the papers still in my hand, my mother's letter and the legal documents. "I see Sarah finally told you. You knew about these shares?" I asked, surprised. He nodded slowly. "Of course. I'm the one who made sure she kept them when the rest of the family wanted to cut her off completely. She was my sister despite everything." I wasn't sure whether to believe him. This contradicted everything my mother had told me about her complete excommunication from the family. "If you were so concerned about her, why didn't you ever contact us? Why did you let her struggle as a single mother after my dad died? Why didn't you come to her funeral?" The questions I'd held inside for years came pouring out. Uncle Richard sank heavily into a chair across from me. "Your mother was stubborn. She refused any help that came directly from me, said she didn't want Taylor charity." He rubbed his face wearily. "But she never returned the checks that came through her attorney, the ones that helped pay for your education. Did she never tell you?" I stared at him, speechless. My college tuition had been covered by what my mother had called your father's insurance policy. I'd never questioned it, assuming my father had planned ahead before his death when I was 12. "She didn't tell me," I said finally, trying to process this new information. "But that doesn't explain tonight. Why did Amanda invite me here just to humiliate me? And why is she trying to frame me for credit card fraud?" Uncle Richard's expression darkened. "That's what I came to talk to you about. There have been financial irregularities at Taylor Enterprises for the past 3 years. Small at first, then increasingly significant. All authorized with codes that only senior family members should have." "And you think I had something to do with it?" I asked incredulously. "No," he said firmly. "But I'm beginning to suspect Amanda might. And if you really do hold 15% of the company as Sarah intended, you'd be the perfect scapegoat." This was becoming more complicated by the minute. "But how would Amanda even know about my shares? You said Mom kept them secret." "The trust became active upon Sarah's death 6 months ago. The paperwork would have been filed with our corporate attorneys." He frowned. "Amanda's husband Thomas works in the legal department. He could have seen the documents." A soft knock interrupted us. The door opened slightly to reveal a man in his 30s with dark hair and a serious expression. "Uncle Richard's security is looking for you," he said, before his eyes landed on me. "Oh, sorry. I didn't realize you had company." "Come in, David," Uncle Richard said. "This is your cousin Margie, Sarah's daughter." David's eyes widened in recognition. "The one Amanda just publicly humiliated. The whole restaurant is talking about it." He stepped forward, extending his hand. "I'm David Taylor Richard's son. I'm sorry about what happened out there. It was completely inappropriate." I shook his hand, still wary. "Seems to be a family tradition." David had the grace to look ashamed. "Not all of us approve of how Aunt Sarah was treated. Or you." Uncle Richard cleared his throat. "David is our CFO now. Bruce Hoffman is retiring next month. He's the one who first noticed the financial discrepancies." David nodded. "I've been tracking them for months. Someone's been siphoning funds through dummy corporations, all authorized with senior executive codes. We were close to figuring out who, but then the trail suddenly went cold 3 weeks ago. Right around when Amanda started calling me," I murmured. The door burst open again, and Lisa rushed in, looking professional and fierce in her work clothes, clearly having come straight from her office. "Margie, are you okay?" she demanded, then noticed the two men. "Who are they?" After quick introductions and a summary of the situation, Lisa's attorney mode kicked into full gear. "So Amanda Taylor publicly humiliated my client fraudulently, used her identity to charge expenses, and may be setting her up to take the fall for corporate embezzlement." Lisa's eyes narrowed. "We need to call the police." "Wait," Uncle Richard held up a hand. "This is still family business. If word gets out about embezzlement, Taylor Enterprises stock will plummet. Thousands of employees could be affected." Lisa wasn't impressed. "With all due respect, Mr. Taylor, your concern for the company doesn't outweigh the fact that your niece tried to frame Margie for fraud." "I'm not suggesting we let her get away with it," Richard replied. "But we need to handle this carefully. If Amanda really is behind the embezzlement, we need proof before we make accusations." David had been tapping on his phone during this exchange. "I've been going through recent transactions. There's a pattern emerging." He looked up at me. "Several large transfers were made using your mother's old employee ID, which should have been deactivated decades ago. So Amanda's been using my mother's credentials. How would she even have access to those?" I asked. "That's what we need to find out," Uncle Richard said. "But first we need to deal with the immediate situation. The restaurant bill the security guards, Amanda, has convinced you're trying to scam the place and whatever else she might have planned." James, the bartender, reappeared at the door looking nervous. "Sorry to interrupt, but Amanda's husband Thomas is at the bar, asking some strange questions about signature verification procedures. Thought you should know." I remembered the documents in my hand, proof of my ownership stake in the company. If Amanda and Thomas were trying to cover their tracks, these papers could be crucial evidence. "We need to make copies of these," I said, holding up my mother's letter and the legal documents. "And we need to find out exactly what Amanda's been doing with Taylor Enterprises' money." Uncle Richard nodded grimly. "And we need to do it quickly. The annual shareholder meeting is next week. If Amanda has been embezzling and plans to pin it on you using your mother's old credentials and your newly acquired shares, that would be her deadline." Lisa took out her phone. "I'm calling a forensic accountant colleague of mine. He can start analyzing the transactions tonight." As the others began making calls and formulating a plan, I stepped back and took a deep breath. Just 3 hours ago, I'd arrived at this restaurant full of hope for family reconciliation. Now, I was in the middle of uncovering what appeared to be a major financial fraud scheme. James touched my arm gently. "Are you okay?" I managed a small smile. "Not really, but I think I'm about to find out who my real family is." Uncle Richard was speaking intently with David, while Lisa was already talking to her colleague on the phone. Through the office window, I could see Amanda in the main restaurant speaking animatedly to Thomas. They kept glancing toward the manager's office, their expressions concerned. "They're getting nervous," James observed, following my gaze. "Good," I said, surprising myself with the steel in my voice. "They should be." As we watched, Thomas pulled out his phone and showed something to Amanda. Her face went pale. They whispered furiously to each other before Thomas abruptly walked away, leaving Amanda looking shaken. "What was that about?" I wondered aloud. My question was answered moments later, when Thomas appeared at the office door looking grim. "I need to speak with Margie," he said, ignoring everyone else in the room. "Alone." Uncle Richard started to object, but Thomas cut him off. "It's about Amanda," he said, his voice tight. "And I think you'll want to hear what I have to say." The tension in the room was palpable as everyone looked between Thomas and me. His request to speak to me alone seemed suspicious given everything that had transpired, but something in his expression gave me pause. "Anything you have to say to Margie, you can say in front of us," Lisa stated firmly, moving protectively closer to me. Thomas ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of genuine distress. "Fine, but you might want to sit down for this." No one moved. Thomas sighed, then pulled out his phone. "I've been gathering evidence against Amanda for the past 8 months, he said, his voice low but clear. Voice recordings, photos of documents, bank statements. At first, I thought she was just skimming a little from the company, using the corporate card for personal expenses, that sort of thing. He tapped on his phone screen, then turned it toward us. On display was a spreadsheet with dates, amounts, and account numbers. But it goes much deeper. She's been systematically embezzling from Taylor Enterprises using multiple executive access codes. When she discovered Margie's mother had left her shares in the company, she saw an opportunity to create a scapegoat. Uncle Richard's face darkened with each word. "Why are you telling us this now, Thomas? You're her husband." Thomas's expression was a mixture of shame and resolution. "I'm also the company's legal counsel. What she's been doing isn't just unethical, it's criminal. And tonight—" He paused, clearly struggling. Tonight was supposed to be phase 1 of framing Margie. Humiliate her publicly, establish her as an outsider, desperate for family connection and money, then create a paper trail of fraud with her name all over it. "The dinner reservation and credit card charges," David murmured. "That's just the beginning," Thomas continued. "She's created a trail making it look like Margie has been using her mother's old credentials to access company funds for years. The plan was to discover the fraud next week at the shareholder meeting, with all evidence pointing to Margie trying to take revenge on the family that rejected her mother. I felt sick listening to the calculated cruelty of the plan. Why would you marry someone capable of this?" Thomas gave a bitter laugh. "She wasn't always like this. Or maybe she was, and I just didn't see it." He turned to Uncle Richard. "I have everything documented. Every transaction, every forged authorization. I've been recording our conversations at home when she talks about it." "That might not be admissible in court," Lisa pointed out. "I'm not concerned about court at this point," Thomas replied. "I just want to stop her before she destroys more lives, including her own." I processed this information trying to reconcile the depths of Amanda's deception. "So, what now?" "We confront her with the evidence." "I think that's exactly what we need to do," Uncle Richard said decisively. "David, call security and have them discreetly block all exits. I don't want Amanda leaving the premises." David nodded and stepped out to make the call. Uncle Richard turned to Thomas. "Are you prepared to show this evidence in front of the whole family?" "Right now. Because that's what needs to happen." Thomas hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Yes. It's time everyone saw the truth." The next 20 minutes were a flurry of activity as we prepared for the confrontation. Uncle Richard sent word to the private dining room that everyone should remain there for an important family announcement. Lisa and I made copies of my mother's letter and the shareholding documents. James agreed to confirm the story about the fraudulent dinner reservation from the restaurant's perspective. As we walked toward the private dining room, Uncle Richard put his hand on my shoulder. "Margie, you don't have to do this. We have enough evidence without putting you through more of their scrutiny." I appreciated the gesture, but I shook my head. This isn't just about the money or the fraud. It's about my mother's memory. It's about the truth. I need to be there. He nodded understanding in his eyes. "You really are just like Sarah." We entered the private dining room together. Uncle Richard, David, Thomas, Lisa, James, and me. Conversation halted immediately as everyone turned to stare at our unusual procession. Amanda, who had returned to the party, stood frozen with a wineglass halfway to her lips. "What is she doing back here?" she demanded, pointing at me with undisguised contempt. "And why is Thomas with her?" Uncle Richard moved to the head of the table, his presence commanding attention. "Everyone, please be seated. We have a serious family matter to discuss." The family members exchanged confused glances, but complied, their curious eyes darting between me and Thomas, who had positioned himself directly across from Amanda. "For the past 3 years," Uncle Richard began, his voice grave, "someone has been stealing from this family, from our company. Using executive access codes to authorize transfers, creating false vendors, and siphoning millions into offshore accounts." Murmurs erupted around the table. Bruce Hoffman, the retiring CFO who I'd overheard earlier, nodded grimly. "Until recently, we couldn't identify the culprit," Uncle Richard continued. "But now we have evidence. Conclusive evidence." Amanda's face had grown increasingly pale, but she attempted to maintain her composure. "What does this have to do with her?" she asked, gesturing dismissively toward me. Everything I said finding my voice. I stepped forward, feeling a strange calm descend over me. "You invited me here tonight as part of an elaborate setup. You planned to humiliate me publicly, then frame me for the very fraud you've been committing." "That's ridiculous," Amanda scoffed, but her voice lacked conviction. "Uncle Richard, are you really going to listen to these absurd accusations from someone who isn't even family?" Actually, I continued pulling out the documents from my mother. I am family. My mother never gave up her shares in Taylor Enterprises. Upon her death, those shares transferred to me. I now own 15% of the company. The room erupted in shocked exclamations. Amanda's face contorted with rage. "She's lying. Those shares were surrendered when Aunt Sarah married. That nobody—" Thomas stood up, his expression resolved. "No, Amanda. You're the one who's been lying." He placed his phone on the table and pressed play. Amanda's voice filled the room. "Once we pin the embezzlement on Sarah's daughter, I'll have access to her shares. Richard will never let a thief maintain ownership. Between that and what we've already moved offshore, we'll have enough to disappear completely." The recording continued, detailing Amanda's plans in her own words. With each damning statement, her face grew more desperate. The family members listened in stunned silence, expressions of shock and disgust spreading around the table. When the recording ended, Amanda lunged for the phone, but Thomas pulled it back. "It's too late," he said quietly. "I've already sent copies to the company's board of directors and the authorities." "You're my husband!" Amanda shrieked. "How could you betray me like this?" "The same way you betrayed your entire family," Thomas replied, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "The same way you were planning to betray Margie, who never did anything to deserve your hatred." Amanda turned desperately to Uncle Richard. "Uncle Richard, you can't believe this. I'm your niece. I've been loyal to this family my entire life." Uncle Richard's face was a mask of controlled fury. "You've been loyal to no one but yourself, Amanda. You stole from the company your grandfather built. You tried to frame an innocent woman, your own cousin, to cover your crimes." "Security is on their way," David said from the doorway where he'd been standing guard. "The police have been called as well." Amanda looked wildly around the room, seeking any ally but found none. The family members who had laughed at me earlier now stared at her with shock and revulsion. In a final, desperate move, Amanda grabbed a steak knife from the table and pointed it toward me. "This is all your fault. If you had just stayed away like you were supposed to, none of this would have happened." Several people gasped, but I held my ground, meeting her gaze steadily. "Put the knife down, Amanda. You've done enough damage." "Listen to her, Amanda, Uncle Richard," said his voice firm, but not unkind. "Don't make this worse than it already is." For a tense moment, Amanda stood with the knife pointed toward me, her hand shaking. Then, as if all the fight suddenly left her body, she crumpled into her chair and began to sob. 2 security guards appeared at the door, followed by James and the restaurant manager. "That's her," James confirmed, pointing to Amanda. "She's the one who fraudulently charged the dinner reservation to Miss Wilson's name." As the guards approached Amanda, I felt no satisfaction, only a profound sadness for the waste of so much potential and the damage caused by unchecked greed and resentment. Uncle Richard turned to address the rest of the family, who sat in stunned silence. "I owe everyone an apology, especially you, Margie. I should have paid more attention to both the company's finances and to the kind of people we've become as a family." He paused, looking around the table. "Sarah Margie's mother was the best of us, and we pushed her away because she chose love over money. That ends tonight. From now on, this family will be defined by integrity and compassion, not wealth and status." As Amanda was escorted out by security with Thomas, following to provide additional evidence to the authorities, I stood in the center of a family that had rejected me my entire life, but who now looked at me with newfound respect, and in some cases genuine remorse. I think it's time Uncle Richard said, looking at me, that you took your rightful place at this table, Margie. This table is for family, and you are most definitely family. The next morning dawned with a surreal quality. I sat in Uncle Richard's expansive home office surrounded by family photographs that spanned decades, photos that should have included my mother and me but didn't. Until now. These were taken at Sarah's 16th birthday, Uncle Richard said, handing me a small album he'd retrieved from a locked cabinet. I kept them hidden because your grandfather couldn't bear to see her after she left. I opened the album with trembling hands. There was my mother, young and radiant, her smile so familiar it made my chest ache. In many photos she stood arm in arm with a teenage Richard, their resemblance unmistakable. She was the smart one, Richard said quietly, a nostalgic smile softening his usually stern features. Always had the best grades, the most friends. Everyone loved Sarah. Then why, I couldn't help asking, why did everyone turn against her when she married my dad? Richard sighed heavily, sitting down across from me. Our father was a controlling man. He built Taylor Enterprises from nothing, and he believed that gave him the right to dictate everyone's lives. When Sarah fell in love with a teacher with no family connections or wealth, Father saw it as a betrayal of everything he'd worked for. He paused, his eyes distant with memories. The rest of us were too weak to stand against him. We chose security over supporting Sarah. It's my greatest regret. The door opened, and Aunt Eleanor, Richard's wife, entered carrying a tray of coffee. In her 70s now, she moved with a grace that spoke of decades of refined living, but her eyes held genuine warmth when they met mine. I found more photos, she said, placing the tray down and retrieving an envelope from her pocket. These were taken after Sarah left. I used to meet her secretly for lunch sometimes, until your grandfather found out and forbade it. I accepted the envelope, overwhelmed by these unexpected connections to my mother's past. Inside were photos of my mother in her 20s, sometimes with a much younger Eleanor, sometimes alone. And then, to my shock, a photo of my mother holding a baby. Me. You knew about me, I asked Eleanor, my voice catching. She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. I met you when you were just 6 weeks old. Sarah was so proud. She glanced at Richard. I wanted to tell him to make peace, but by then, everyone was so entrenched in their positions. After your grandfather died, Richard added, I tried to reach out, but Sarah refused all contact. She said it was too late, that she'd made a new life. I respected her decision, though it broke my heart. I could only help from a distance, through the trust fund for your education. I thought about all the years of struggle of my mother working 2 jobs to make ends meet after my father died. She was very proud, I acknowledged. But she loved you all even after everything. She kept every newspaper clipping that mentioned the family. Eleanor smiled sadly. That sounds like Sarah. A soft knock interrupted us, and David entered holding a stack of files. The forensic accountants have preliminary findings, he said, his expression grim. Amanda's been embezzling for even longer than we thought. Almost 5 years. The total is approaching $7 million. Richard took the files, scanning the contents with a deepening frown. How did we miss this for so long? She was clever, David replied. Used multiple methods, kept each transaction relatively small, and she had access to override security protocols. He turned to me. But that's not all we found. There's evidence she was sending anonymous money to various family members, then using that as leverage. I raised an eyebrow. Blackmail? David nodded. Several cousins received gifts when they were in financial trouble. Money they thought came from Uncle Richard's personal accounts, but actually came from embezzled company funds. Amanda later used that to ensure their loyalty and silence. Richard closed the file, his expression troubled. She's been playing a long game, manipulating everyone, including me. Where is she now? I asked. In custody, David said. The evidence was overwhelming. Thomas provided everything, including offshore account details. They're freezing assets now. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of more family members. Throughout the morning, a steady stream of Taylors came to Richard's home. Cousins I'd never met, distant relatives curious about Sarah's daughter, even some who had been at Bellamy's the night before and had laughed at Amanda's cruelty. Most came to apologize. Some out of genuine remorse. Others perhaps out of self-interest, now that I was known to own a significant portion of the company. I tried to take each interaction at face value, though Lisa, who had insisted on staying by my side through everything, kept a skeptical eye on the proceedings. "Vultures," she muttered, after a particularly effusive second cousin departed. "Now that you're rich, they're all suddenly your best friends." Not all of them, I countered, thinking of David and his wife Jenny, who had been genuinely kind. Or Aunt Eleanor, whose secret connection to my mother seemed sincere. By afternoon, a family meeting was convened in Richard's spacious living room. Almost 30 tailors of various ages gathered, an intimidating array of well-dressed, confident people who shared my blood but were essentially strangers. First, Richard began when everyone had settled. "I want to formally acknowledge Margie as a full and equal member of this family, with all the rights and privileges that entails, including her 15% ownership of Taylor Enterprises." There were murmurs of agreement, though I noticed a few tight smiles among the older generation. Second, in light of recent events, the board has voted for a complete audit of the company's finances and operations. David will be overseeing this as our new CFO. David nodded solemnly from his position near the fireplace. Finally, Richard continued, his voice growing more serious. "I believe it's time we address the values of this family. For too long, we've prioritized wealth and status over compassion and integrity. That ends today." He turned to me, his expression softening. "Margie has agreed to join the board and to head a new charitable foundation using her portion of the company profits. The Taylor Foundation will focus on supporting families in crisis, something I believe Sarah would have approved of." I hadn't expected him to announce this so publicly, but I appreciated the vote of confidence. In our private discussions that morning, I'd explained my reluctance to leave my social work career entirely, and we'd reached this compromise. After the formal meeting, as people broke into smaller conversation groups, a young woman approached me somewhat hesitantly. She appeared to be in her early 20s, with the same blonde hair that seemed to be a Taylor trademark, though her style was considerably more casual than most of the family. "Hi, I'm Sophie," she said, extending her hand. "Amanda's sister." I tensed slightly but shook her hand. "Nice to meet you." She gave a rueful smile. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry for what Amanda did, and—" She hesitated. "I found these in her things when I was helping Thomas pack up some of her stuff." She handed me a small bundle of letters, their edges worn with age. I recognized my mother's handwriting immediately on the top envelope. "They're addressed to you," Sophie explained. "I think Amanda intercepted them years ago. They were hidden in her keepsake box." I took the letters with trembling hands. "Thank you for giving these to me." Sophie nodded. I always knew something was off with Amanda. Even as kids, she was obsessed with the family legacy, with being the perfect Taylor. Her expression grew sad. "I think in her mind you and your mom represented everything that threatened that perfect image." As Sophie moved away, I carefully opened the first letter, dated 15 years ago, around the time I'd started college. "My dearest Margie," my mother had written, "I hope this letter finds you well as you begin this new chapter. There's something I need to tell you about our family." Tears filled my eyes as I realized this was her first attempt to tell me about my inheritance, about the shares that would one day be mine. The letter spoke of her hope that I might eventually reconcile with the Taylors, that I might find a place in the family that had rejected her, but that she still loved. At the bottom was a postscript. "If Richard ever reaches out to you, please listen. Despite everything, he was always my protector. He understands family in a way the others never did." I carefully refolded the letter, overwhelmed by the knowledge that my mother had tried to bridge this gap years ago, only to have her efforts thwarted by Amanda's jealousy and manipulation. Later, as the gathering was winding down, I found myself on the terrace with James, who had been invited at my request. Despite only knowing him for a day, His steady presence had become a comfort amid the whirlwind of family revelations. "How are you holding up?" he asked, handing me a glass of water. "Still processing," I admitted. 24 hours ago, I was a social worker, with no family except my best friend. Now I'm a company shareholder, with more relatives than I can keep track of. James smiled. "Life changes fast sometimes." "That it does." I studied him curiously. "Why did you help me?" "At the restaurant. You didn't know me." He considered the question seriously. I'd seen Amanda's behavior before, the way she treated staff, the way she manipulated situations. "When I saw what she was doing to you?" He shrugged. "It just wasn't right." "Well, I'm grateful," I said sincerely. "Without your intervention, things might have gone very differently." From inside, I heard Uncle Richard calling my name. "Sounds like duty calls," I said, reluctant to end our conversation. James nodded in understanding. "For what it's worth, I think you're handling all of this with remarkable grace. Your mother would be proud." The mention of my mother from this man who had never known her but somehow understood her importance touched me deeply. "Thank you, James," I said softly. "I hope so." As I turned to go back inside to my new family, I felt a strange sense of peace wash over me. There was still much to figure out. My role in the company, my relationship with these newfound relatives, and what direction my life would take now. But for the first time, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be, finally claiming the place that had been waiting for me all along. 6 months later, I stood at the podium in the grand ballroom of the Westfield Hotel, looking out over the crowd gathered for the first annual Taylor Foundation Benefit Gala. The room sparkled with elegant decorations tables adorned with centerpieces that complemented the foundation's logo, a simple tree with spreading branches symbolizing family connections and growth. "Thank you all for coming tonight." I began, my voice steady despite the butterflies in my stomach. Public speaking had never been my forte, but tonight felt different. Tonight, I was speaking from the heart. When we established the Taylor Foundation 6 months ago, we had a simple mission to support families in crisis and help build bridges across the divides that too often separate us. From my position at the podium, I could see familiar faces throughout the crowd. Lisa sat at a front table beaming with pride. Next to her was James, who had become much more than just the bartender who'd helped me that fateful night. Our relationship had developed slowly and naturally over the past months, built on mutual respect and a shared value system. Uncle Richard and Aunt Eleanor occupied the center table, surrounded by various Taylor family members. At 82, Uncle Richard had officially stepped down as CEO of Taylor Enterprises, though he remained chairman of the board. David had taken over daily operations, implementing transparency measures and ethical guidelines that had transformed the company culture. In our first 6 months, I continued, we've provided emergency assistance to over 500 families, established 3 community centers in underserved neighborhoods, and created scholarship programs for first-generation college students. None of this would have been possible without your generous support. I glanced down at my notes, then set them aside. The statistics and figures were important, but they weren't what this night was really about. My mother used to tell me that family isn't just about blood relations. It's about who stands beside you in difficult times, who celebrates your victories as if they were their own, and who helps you become your best self. I paused, emotional memories washing over me. She was right. And although she isn't here tonight, her spirit lives on in everything the Foundation does. In the months since the confrontation at Bellamy's, my life had transformed in ways I never could have imagined. I'd maintained my role as a social worker, though, on a part-time basis, while taking on responsibilities at Taylor Enterprises and establishing the Foundation. My experience working with families in crisis had provided invaluable insight into how the Foundation could best serve those in need. Amanda had pled guilty to multiple counts of embezzlement and fraud, accepting a plea deal in exchange for returning the stolen funds. Thomas had filed for divorce and taken custody of their children, a boy and girl who were now regular visitors at family gatherings. They were innocent in all of this, and the family had rallied to ensure they didn't suffer for their mother's mistakes. Tonight we're announcing a new initiative, I said, returning to my prepared remarks. The Sarah Taylor Wilson Reconnection Program, designed specifically to help families heal from estrangement and build healthy relationships. Because sometimes the hardest bridges to build are the ones closest to home. This program was especially meaningful to me, inspired directly by my own experience and my mother's story. The pilot program would offer counseling mediation services and support groups for families working to overcome past conflicts. As I concluded my speech and the applause washed over me, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. 6 months ago, I'd walked into Bellamy's hoping for reconciliation, but expecting rejection. Instead, I'd found not only my place in the Taylor family, but also my purpose. After the formal presentations, as guests mingled and enjoyed the gala, I found myself in a quiet corner with Uncle Richard. "Your mother would be so proud," he said, his eyes misty with emotion. "You've done more for this family in 6 months than I did in 30 years. I shook my head. "That's not true. You kept her shares safe all those years. You made sure I got an education. You were looking out for us in your own way." "Not enough," he insisted. "I should have stood up to my father. Should have maintained contact regardless of his disapproval." "We can't change the past," I said gently, "but we can learn from it. That's what the foundation is all about." He nodded, squeezing my hand affectionately before being called away by a business associate. James appeared at my side, handsome in his tuxedo. "You were amazing up there," he said, handing me a glass of water. He'd quickly learned that I preferred water to champagne at these events, wanting to keep a clear head. "Thank you." For everything, I replied, meaning much more than just the compliment. Over the past months, James had been my anchor amid the whirlwind of family dynamics and new responsibilities. His steady presence and honest perspective had kept me grounded. "Look who I found hiding by the dessert table," James said, stepping aside to reveal Sophie, Amanda's sister, accompanied by Amanda's children, Emma and Jack, dressed in their formal best. Aunt Margie, Emma exclaimed, rushing forward to hug me. At 12, she was already showing signs of the Taylor confidence, but without her mother's coldness. Our project won first prize at school, the one about the foundation. "That's wonderful." I knelt to her level, genuinely pleased. The children had been creating a presentation about the Taylor Foundation for their school's community service fair. "I told you it would be great." Jack, more reserved at 14, offered a shy smile. "Dad said we might be able to volunteer at the community center this summer." "We'd love to have you," I assured him. "The art program could especially use someone with your talent." Sophie watched our interaction with a gentle smile. Unlike her sister, she had no interest in the corporate side of the family business, instead pursuing a career in educational psychology. She'd become a valuable advisor for the Foundation's youth programs. "They wouldn't stop talking about coming tonight," she told me, as the children wandered off toward the dessert table again. "You've been so good with them, Margie." "Despite everything with Amanda." "They're family," I said simply. "They shouldn't pay for their mother's mistakes." The evening continued, with dancing, more mingling, and the successful auction of donated items to raise additional funds. As things wound down near midnight, I found myself on the hotel's terrace, taking a moment of quiet reflection. The night air was cool, the city lights twinkling below. I thought about my journey over the past 6 months, from an outsider desperate for connection to someone who had found not just family but purpose. I remembered the humiliation at Bellamy's, the cruel laughter, the shock of the fraudulent bill. How close I had come to walking away, to missing the truth about my inheritance and my place in the family, if I hadn't found the courage to push back that night. "There you are," Lisa's voice interrupted my thoughts as she joined me on the terrace. "Quite a night. Quite a 6 months," I amended. She leaned against the railing beside me. "Remember when I told you not to go to that family reunion, that it was a trap?" I laughed. "Your exact words were, 'Those rich jerks don't deserve you.'" "Well, I was half right," she grinned. "It was a trap, just not the one we expected." "Life rarely goes as expected," I agreed. "Sometimes that's a good thing." From inside, I could hear the band playing their final number. Soon we'd need to go back in for closing remarks and goodbyes. But for now, this moment of quiet reflection felt necessary. "What's next for you?" Lisa asked. "Foundation, company, social work, maybe a certain bartender turned restaurant manager?" She wiggled her eyebrows suggestively. I smiled, thinking of James and our growing relationship. All of the above, I hope. But mostly, I want to honor my mother's legacy. She never gave up on the idea of family, even when they gave up on her. "She'd be proud of you," Lisa said. "Not just for the foundation or the company stuff, but for how you've handled everything, with grace and compassion." I thought about the lessons of the past 6 months, about forgiveness without forgetting, about standing firm in my values, while remaining open to reconciliation about the true meaning of family. "You know what I've learned through all this?" I said thoughtfully. "A seat at the table isn't worth much if you have to compromise who you are to sit there." My mother understood that. She chose her own path, even when it was the harder one. And look where that led. Lisa gestured toward the ballroom where the Taylor family, my family, was gathered. Full circle. Uncle Richard appeared at the terrace doorway. "There you are, Margie. We're ready for the closing toast." I nodded, taking a deep breath before following him inside. As I returned to the podium one last time, looking out at the gathered faces, family members, new friends, supporters of the foundation, I felt a profound sense of belonging. "Before we end tonight's celebration," I began, "I want to offer a toast to family, both the one we're born into and the one we create, to second chances and new beginnings, and to the power of staying true to ourselves, even when the path forward isn't clear." I raised my glass, emotion filling my throat. My mother used to say that the true measure of wealth isn't in bank accounts or business holdings. It's in the lives we touch and the love we share. By that measure, I feel like the richest person in the world tonight. As glasses were raised around the room, I caught James's eye. His warm smile reflected back the peace I felt in my heart. The journey hadn't been easy, and there would undoubtedly be more challenges ahead. But I had found my place at the table. Not just the Taylor family table, but the larger table of life. And this time, no one could tell me I didn't belong. Have you ever experienced a moment when rejection turned into an unexpected blessing? When someone tried to hurt you, but it led to something better? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that sometimes the table we're excluded from isn't the one we were meant to sit at anyway. Thank you for listening, and I wish you all the courage to stand in your truth, even when it feels like you're standing alone.